We believe it would be appropriate to have been given more warning.
These two Chinese ships carried the same number of heavy missiles as Australia's entire navy.
They have the ability to deploy to our region and conduct sustained operations.
These are not ships out on a sightseeing cruise. These are very significant assets with massive firepower.
Australia was startled when a Chinese task group of 3 warships circumnavigated the country in February 2025. But their mission exploded onto national headlines when a Virgin Airlines passenger jet radioed a report to Sydney air traffic controllers that the warships were firing live weaponry beneath it.
It is the first time we have seen a Chinese naval task group circumnavigate Australia. Now, it's not the first time we've seen a Chinese naval task group operate in the vicinity of Australia, so it's not unprecedented, but it certainly is uncommon.
The Tasman feels a bit more like the backyard in a way, and we're not necessarily used to seeing other fleets, be they Chinese or any other, operating in that way. Why are they here? Why do they need to be here?
Behind it all is the growing crisis in the East and South China Seas. Communist China insists these belong solely to it. The United Nations disagrees. An international court ruled that the Philippines and Vietnam have territorial rights under the law of the sea. The rest is international waters, and Australia has been helping to protect this freedom of navigation for decades.
我们和很多国家相关的一些国家都制定的有海空相遇的这个规则，这些呢也是为了这个在相遇的时候呢发生不必要的这样的一些危险。但是我要这个反问一下的就是，刚才大家提到的这些问题，为什么它都是发生在中国领空和领海附近，而不是发生在其他国家的领空和领海附近？那就是我们中国的这个军机和军舰从来都不会到这个其他国家领空和领海附近去做所谓的航行霸权。
Warships do gunnery firings all the time at sea. I mean, this is what warships do. And this term about best practice, I think it was kind of a woolly term of saying we would like for them to tell us. But certainly, you know, we wouldn't, I don't think we would. It's just not something that you would consider. And also, it's not something you would want to establish as common practice, because when you start doing those sort of things, you restrict your own freedoms and they start to expect it.
Nobody disputes China's right to circumnavigate Australia or to use international waters for war games. What is disputed is the location, timing and warning given for its anti-missile and anti-ship weapons tests, especially given the presence of a major international passenger jet corridor directly above.
中方有关言论与事实完全不符。中方舰艇编队演训海域远离澳大利亚海岸线，完全是公海海域。期间，中方在事先反复发布安全通告的基础上，组织了舰炮对海实弹射击训练。中方行动完全符合国际法和国际通行做法，不会对航空飞行安全造成影响。
But the same day in February, and I think it was around the 13th, the Department of Defense released that a Chinese fighter aircraft had deployed chaff within 30 metres of an Australian P-8 operating in international waters. It's not the same thing. They're very, very different things. And I think it's important for us to have that nuanced approach, because if we don't, we tend to overreact to everything. Where do we actually generate the capacity to deal with a real crisis, of which this was not?
I do think there may also have been an element of testing our reactions, but I don't think it fits any sort of pattern of, say, Chinese maritime coercion. This is not the kind of operation we see in the South China Sea occurring between, say, China and the Philippines and China and Vietnam. This is a pretty common type of exercise that most major naval powers would conduct.
The small task force really rammed home the scale of Australia's defence problem. These two Chinese ships carried the same number of heavy missiles as Australia's entire navy. So that posed the question, what if?
I think we should be writing to the PLA Navy and thanking them for coming to visit, because I think it really forced some really important conversations for Australia. We're going to increasingly see Chinese task groups operating down here. Now, that's not necessarily a threat, but in the event of a crisis or conflict, it certainly would be. And I think that's the thing that we really should take away from this is, why do we feel so vulnerable? Because of our limited ability to respond. How do we address that? We address that through investment.
We do also need a more mature conversation nationally about our vulnerabilities in the event of conflict. And it's not just our maritime surface trade. right? In an interconnected world, we are highly reliant on submarine data cables. So we have a series of vulnerabilities that we haven't really thought through or had a grown-up conversation about.
So what is the official Chinese party line on this matter? Is it a message? Is it a misunderstanding? Or is it all Australia's fault?
But tell me and tell mankind, who in the world of today is constituting a threat to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Australia? Which country wants to move its troops, military or otherwise, closer to Australia, to invade Australia, to land on Australia, for example, to infringe on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Australia, especially on the precondition of this blood treaty between the United States and Australia? This is really blowing the situation completely out of proportion.